completely alien to them. For them, rulers are deities, that the politics and the religious work hand in hand, that God does that. Even the people of Israel, who only have one God and know that their rulers are not deities, also recognize that their rulers are anointed by God, and therefore their leaders are in a special relationship with God. So this isn't about the separation of church and state. That reads our cultural norms into the culture of their day. However, it is about recognizing who we belong to. It's about recognizing that God is bigger than a ruler, and that God is bigger than a nation. God is the God of all. God is as big as a creator God. I am the Lord your God, there is no other. This payment, this tax payment, is a very painful reminder to the people of Israel that the land promised to Abraham is being occupied by foreign powers who worship foreign gods. Every time they pull the money out, and they need that money to pay the tax, it must be Roman coins that pay this tax. Every time they pull it out, they are reminded that an enemy is in power. But I am the Lord your God, there is no other. And yet they live with this reminder that they don't see their Lord in control. They see Caesar. They are living in difficult times where when they look around at their world, they wonder, where are you, God? And when will you redeem us? When will you bring somebody out of our midst, like us, to bring us a salvation? It's difficult for them to remember that God is present and listening to them. Like the people of Israel that Isaiah speaks to, there are so many times when God works in our lives in ways that we just don't see, that we don't perceive, that God enters our lives in very unlikely ways. God actually likes to surprise people. And so for the people in exile, God takes Cyrus and his Persian army and he uses them to bring freedom to God's people. In fact, Yahweh is in control. This coin, it has a proclamation that Caesar is God. Give to Caesar what is his. Give your heart, your life, your trust, your faith to God. So where do we look to see God in our lives? I think we need to listen to what Isaiah tells the people, that sometimes we have to open our hearts and our minds to hearing and seeing God working in the most unlikely ways and in the most unexpected directions. To truly see God working truly requires faith, because sometimes God definitely tests our preconceived expectations. I feel that way every Sunday when I get up here. I so do not fit my own stereotype of what a pastor should be. I tell you in all honesty. And I know that there are many people for whom just by my gender, God is working in an unexpected way. I think mainly for my sense of humor, God is working in an unexpected and not always happy way. But this text, and this use of Cyrus, I have to tell you, you can tell I'm a little fixated on that this week. 2 weeks ago, we had our chat and chew. And I have to tell you, that chat and chew was so powerful to me. For those of you that don't know, Chat and Chew is the first Sunday of the month, and we stayed together afterwards to talk very intentionally about the direction of Gethsemane and where we see God working here in our midst. And 2 weeks ago, I felt God's presence so strongly in that room. I really felt God working through our conversation, reminding us of God's presence and God's power to breathe new life. And one of the things that we committed to do as a congregation, and for those of you who weren't there and you don't know this, I would invite you to join us. But you can do it every day. You can do it as much as you want, but at least on Wednesday mornings at 9:30 or 9:45, or from 9:30 to 9:45. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, to stop what you're doing and to pray for God's ministry through Gethsemane. To stop and to pray so that collectively spread out over the city or the state or the nation, wherever any of us might happen to be, that all together we are praying to God to let us hear and see the direction that God has for the work that God is doing through Gethsemane. I find that powerful to think of all of us together praying at the same time for this same thing. And the other thing that we vowed to do together is to begin changing the way that we perceive Gethsemane. And that instead of talking, when you're talking with friends or family, to talk about my congregation or my church, our church, is to substitute that pronoun, mine or ours, with the word God. God's congregation of Gethsemane, or God's church of Gethsemane, or the work being done at God's congregation, God's church, to help us to refocus that this isn't about our plans. Surprise! Who knows? Who knows what you may get? But it's not our doing. It is God's work. And that we are the faithful people that live out God's work. That we live as disciples of Christ to serve this world. And what we're seeking is to hear God here and now in Gethsemane and in our life saying, this is where I am leading you. Hearing that bold proclamation of Isaiah reminds us to empty ourselves of how we think God should work or in what ways we think God can work. It strips away the walls of that box in which we place God. And Jesus challenged us to dig into our pockets and to see what false idols we might be carrying that prevent us from seeing the true work of God in all places and in all times. So I think the challenge that we have in these texts and in our time together is to give ourselves to God, because it is to God that we belong. And so I ask that, like the people of Israel, we continue to pray often and deeply for God's direction, so that we can open our hearts and our minds to the mystery and the power and the bigness of God, to use people and events that we may never have thought, like a meatball dinner or brats or whatever comes our way, to serve God, so that we might actually be God's servants today and forever. Amen.